What a good-looking crowd. 2 years after September 11, I was at the intersection of a busy crossroad in downtown Melbourne, waiting for the light to go green when a car pulled up in front of me, stopped at the lights. This guy wound his window down, looked me square in the eye. I was dressed similar to this. And he shouted out at the top of his lungs, "Where's your bomb, baby?" Literally, "Where's your bomb, baby?" I take great pride in confrontation. And I stared this punk back to his face, and I looked at him, motioned to my purse that was on my shoulder, and I went, quite literally, And it did feel good to have that, to give as good as you get. And for a little while there was a happy dance, and that was great. But on reflection, it made me wonder, seriously, what would possess a complete stranger to apply such a vile stereotype about someone he didn't know? 1989, Public Enemy, United States hip-hop group, coined the iconic song, the cult classic, "Don't Believe the Hype." If we extend hype to include cultural stereotypes, then I would add to that, exceed it. I call those who apply stereotypes, I call those stereotypers. They're people who label. They're the people who decide, based on real or imagined belief, how other groups look or other groups should be identified. I call those who receive stereotypes, who are the victims of stereotypes, they're the typees. They're the ones who get labelled and have to walk around with the baggage of typers. Now, I accept at a human level, our brain defaults sometimes to stereotype settings. It helps us make sense of the masses of communities and cultures and individuals we have. It's a sort of social conditioning. And as far as innocuous cultural stereotyping goes, it's not a biggie. But when that line is crossed and the stereotype progresses from being one that's innocuous to suddenly something that's offensive, then we need to check ourselves. Look, innocuous stereotypes can include Italian builder, British backpacker, Indian student, typically. But the more offensive stereotypes might include the poor African, or my favourite, the Islamic militant. So what is it that causes these stereotypes to come to bear? Well, I have a few theories. And at the top of that list is the media, and how the media engages in promoting difference for a profit margin. The other sells, and when the other is frightening, it sells even better. We have films, we have entire genres of films dedicated, again, to polarising East from West, good and evil. This is how the industry works. Then there's politics, another industry, where politicians and policy sometimes is leveraged, often at the expense of a minority, to promote the mainstream. There can be leverage in that. It could be an election time. There could be economic imperative. It could be national security. But these behaviours and these policies can entrench stereotypes and therefore give currency to stereotypers in enacting. As a stereotypee, as a person who has been on the receiving end of stereotypes for as long as I can remember, I think this locates me in an authentic place of being able to explain how I subverted the hype and how I turned my negative into a positive. I'll accept, and I do accept, that there are people out there who see me, maybe even today, who are surprised that I speak English, or that I might be making some sense even. I get that, it happens. But what that kind of superficial assessment belies is that myself, like yourselves, we're layered in depth and complexity. I was born in Kenya, in East Africa. I'm 5th generation East African born, of Indian heritage. But I grew up in Bendigo, So I'm a country Victorian girl. And my childhood memories are flitted with iconic moments of an Australian upbringing. Stereotypes. I was catching yabbies. I was playing with my Barbies, doing bush dancing and square ball. I even had a BMX bike. And my fetish with my BMX bike is the reason why, to this day, I covet a desire to ride a Harley. See, hijabi on a Harley, that has got to be a stereotype that's been exceeded right there, I'm sure. I was the brown kid on the white block from the get-go, from kinder and school. In kindergarten, I was fortunate enough to play in our Christmas concert, one of the Seven Dwarfs. I was the first brown dopey that the kindergarten had ever seen, and I take great pride in that because I believe that was my foray into destroying stereotypes. And I carried that with me in primary school and high school, even when I got to work, where I was the only Muslim woman in the workforce. And as I proceeded, the stereotypes were innocuous for the most part. They really were. You speak English so well. Or, what accent is that? They could never reconcile the appearance with the sound. And I would say to their amusement, or to mine, country Victorian accent, which threw them completely. But all of this changed, because then September 11 happened, and there was a seismic shift in the stereotype that I was applied with, which was previously quirky and exotic, to suddenly representing an entity that was maligned, represented something to be feared, through no act of my own. This is what I came to wear. But I realised, in my work capacity, in my professional and even voluntary capacity, there were things that I could do to leverage this stereotype as a positive. I was involved in various community platforms, increasingly, to give my voice to some of the ethnic or the diverse voices in our community. What were some of the experiences of minorities? And the more that I was called on to give these opinions, I realised I ticked a lot of quotas. I was quota queen. At one stage I was female, over 35, brown, short, Muslim, and in a headscarf. I was off the charts on the quota radar, but I owned it. I owned that difference because it gave me avenues to platforms that I wouldn't have previously had, and it allowed me an opportunity to engage with change makers and peoples who were quite entrenched in their views about me and my community. And I used this platform to leverage social change, not as an apologist, but as an activist. This was an instrumental difference. And that empowerment that you get through self-respect begets respect. So I realised that. And there are days when being quota queen gets exhausting, and you just want to be a wallflower sometimes, but it's hard when you look like this. But I appreciate the gains that are made when I can pay forward change for other people in my situation, not only in paving the way for them to achieve, but also, more importantly, in actually having conversations with stereotypers and making them reassess where they're standing. That's a pretty powerful experience to have, and only I can make that difference because it's authentic. You know you've come full circle in this Taipei win when your son, in my case my son, at his kindergarten concert just a few years ago, was called up to play the role of one of the three wise men in his Christmas nativity play. Now, for a lot of people, that's like, yeah, okay, biggie deal. But this was a huge stereotype victory for me. He was the only Muslim kid in his class. And so, yeah, to play that role, for me, felt very gratifying. It was almost like history repeating itself. You know, dopey, well, it's probably a stretch, but it worked for me at the time anyway. There is, however, still a long way to go in defeating this war against hype. And there are two pet hates in particular that I hate, that really bother me. And they include the language that we deploy and the images that we use to describe the other. And for the purpose of of my experience, when we're describing all things to do with Islam and Muslim, typically there is a very strong sentiment of fear that's associated with this imagery. And if you think about a typical image in a newspaper or on a news scene of a week to do with Islam or with Muslims, it'll be flattered with men in beards who are burning something, an effigy, a flag, a building. There'll be rallies, there'll be protests, there'll be women in black. It'll be pretty negative. It'll pretty much creating a sense of panic. This is the formulaic file footage, or the FFF, that the media try to deploy. What you're not seeing in this narrative is you're not seeing the flip side. You're not seeing the imagery of the successful men and women from the Muslim community here or abroad. Those working in protective services, those who are pioneers in medicine and science and the arts. We have contestants on MasterChef and The Amazing Race, but they're not getting anywhere near the kudos and the platform that their counterparts are, and you have to ask yourself why. What is this myopic prism of fear that is driving the media to create these images? Then, of course, there's language and the lexicon of hate that we deploy in describing the other. That's relentless and it's powerful. When my daughter was in grade 5, she came home very distraught one day and said, "Mum, there were these guys at school today and they said how they read in the paper that an Islamic terrorist had blown up a bomb, and wouldn't it be easy if we just killed all the Muslims?" And I kind of felt that, "Mum, I'm really proud of being a Muslim and of being an Aussie, but if I tell my friends about the Muslim part, they're going to hate me." So this was an aha moment for me, because I appreciated that not only can the lexicon of hate and the semantics we deploy entrench stereotypes, in young minds they can birth them. We're coming from an information culture now that's premised on minimum words, maximum impact. We have news limits on our updates, on our Twitter feeds. We know. And when your news source is your news feed, it's not surprising then that what gets compromised is the context and the substance of a story. These are realities. If you add to that the headline grabbers that dominate the news story for all things Muslim and Islam, you have what I call the bouquet of isms. I challenge you to find a news story in the last week that didn't include one of terrorism, Islamism, extremism, fundamentalism, militarism, radicalism. I think there could be more. That's just the top of my head. It's exhausting. It's an almost vitriolic or diatribe that's constantly being thrown through all different media sources. There is an alternative reality that's being told. You don't have to accept the myopic view of the world seen through a lens of hate. The choice is yours. What would you do? Exceeding the hype is a call to arms for both stereotypers and stereotypees. Both need to engage in a culture of toppling the walls of lazydom. By this I mean status quo is a comfy place to be. It is. But we're not really going to progress our worldview if we remain out of communication with those at the sidelines. We need to engage with them. To stereotypers, I commend you to engage in this dialogue. Don't accept that what you see is what you get, because often it is multiply layered. And consider the possibility that just perhaps you're being fed a skewed view of reality. And conversations are the antidote to stereotypes. So let's have more of them. To stereotypees, I commend you to seek the platforms out that will enable you self-promotion, that will enable you self-respect, not as an apologist but as an activist, and own your narrative before someone else owns it for you. A friend of mine told me only recently, he said, there is a way forward if we pursue what is right over who is right. A simple truth. If we exceed the hype by realising that the agency within us is there to be leveraged to do that, we might actually move towards achieving that path. And if you listen very carefully, can you hear that? That is the sound of another stereotype disappearing today.